Hey guys, so in this video I'm doing a coaching session with a viewer, and toward the end of the second hour of verbal session the concept of builds came up, and during this time I explained to him a bit about my tank build, which he'd found success with already, and I addressed some of the comments I've seen here on YouTube, on Reddit, and in Discord as well, which you can join through the link in the description if you want an easy way to talk to me. And please like the video if you want to follow up on the build. I'll do an in-depth guide for it for patch 6.24 if this gets 350 likes, and enjoy. But a lot of the times in games like that, if you didn't have that Malphite, who admittedly didn't really do his job that game, your job would be to engage. It's especially good when you're behind to engage, as odd as it sounds. But for Azir, it's really true, because Azir has that kind of he's different from Malphite in the way that he engages. He's kind of like a Lee Sin in the fact that he's not just engaging team fights, but he's also creating picks at the same time. So when you engage, you're pushing carries into your tanks, into your bruisers, into your carries. You're putting them out of position, so they're not getting that usual easy damage off, and they're dying quickly because they're in a bad spot. Where when Malphite engages, they're stationary. He knocks them up.
Team. Yeah,
and sometimes they're, like you said, grouped with their whole team, and your team still has to position themselves to get off damage properly. So when the knockup ends, if you don't have that big burst comp with a Malphite and a Ziggs, or like that AoE wombo cheese, that you're not always going to have, especially if you're playing Azir, where if you're not way ahead, then you don't have a lot of AoE burst. So Azir is more, like I said, in the fashion of engaging through picks, where you're jumping in on like an ADC and support that are huddled together, and you kill the ADC, and what's the support going to do to your team? Nothing. And then you just kind of, rush him down, and he dies, and then you can just flood in on the rest of their team. Whereas, like I said, if it's a Malphite, then you still have to set up a team fight. It's not a pick in the traditional sense, where the kills are just being fed to you, like a Lee Sin in Sec would do. And that's why the Azir engages are so strong, and why building him tank is really good, and why it's okay for you to make these plays and engages when you're behind in games, because if you're creating picks, that's how you get back into games. That's the key portion of the comebacks, where you're creating picks and you're using those picks to snowball into bigger objectives, bigger teamfight wins, taking towers, taking barons, taking elder dragons, stuff like that. And so, in the same vein of things, when you're behind on Azir, the tank build is even stronger, because then you can make those engages and you're not risking trading a 1-for-1 with the enemy carry. You're still gonna put out damage, however less it may be than the DPS build. You're still outputting damage, and whether you're doing 1,000 damage a second or 100 damage a second, you're still doing 100 more damage a second than the dead AD carry that you caused to die, right?
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
So that always has that definitive value in it that the other builds don't necessarily get. And it doesn't have that safety, of being tanky, where if you're behind and you're a DPS build, a lot of the time you're not getting off the damage that you need, because if you were, then you wouldn't be behind. You'd be putting out damage and you'd be killing people, you'd be winning these team fights. Or you're behind and you're able to do this damage, but your team is behind such that Aurelia that was in your game can just jump on you and kill you, and there's all your damage gone, and what have you done? You did a little bit of damage and then you died. And that Aurelia is
Yeah.
going to go on killing more and more of your teammates because they're not going to do anything without the damage that they're now lacking.
Mhm.
Yeah, so like I was saying, on the other side of that, it's the tankiness and the safety that is key in that tank build. And the ability to put down pressure when you're behind and not just get bursted and have everything fall apart, where she dives you, you ult her away, and you die anyway, and that's all that you've done. Where if you're going for this tank build, you engage, you create a pick, you get a kill, and then maybe even if you die, you've done that. You've gotten that pick. Maybe your team is still able to, clean up the fight even though they're behind because you created that good pick and you did your job.
Mhm.
But there
Okay.
were a lot of comments on the video, especially about how it's weak when you're behind because your team needs damage from you as a mid laner, but it's not really equating what's happening in this current meta with mid laners, where you have this Syndra whose job is to one tap all the AD carry and then delete her. You're in a way doing the same thing through engaging in this pick format that I mentioned earlier, where
Yeah.
you are kind of assassinating in a way this AD carry by pushing him into your team.
Yeah. So
And
you're not necessarily doing the damage, but you're allowing your team to get back into the game by
exactly, you're
killing people. Yeah.
you're say in a way indirectly dealing that damage.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. And he still does damage with the build too. Like I've used that exact build that you said in the video.
Yeah,
Like his late game DPS is still freaking cool. Like
yeah,
it's
definitely,
nice.
definitely. So it's basically taking what I liked from the old Rod of Ages build and turning it more into a tanky engage build, where the old
Yeah. Yeah.
Roa was more about putting out that DPS but staying safe from divers, and this one is being the diver yourself, being the engager, like really getting into the middle of the team fight, becoming a sort of Lee Sin Malphite hybrid initiator where you're engaging, and then let's say you engage on, like I said earlier, the AD and the support, and then their AP mid mage, whoever you are laning against, they're still in the back line, and you're tanky. They can't kill you, and you're just shredding them down because you also have late game. You have that allies. You have the Roa AP. You have sometimes Leandries or Abyssal, something like that.
Hmm.
Like you still have damage items. It's not devoid of that. And on top of that, redemption, really strong item right now. It's gonna
Yeah.
give damage as well. It's not a lot of damage, but it can still be a good chunk of damage to squishies in the late game.
Hmm.
So those are that's like my opinion on what I've been hearing about the build.